Governor, it's great to see you. Thank you for being with us today.
Oh, good to be on with you. Thank
What do you think about this evolution that a guy like JD Vance went on here? Are you going to find yourself telling a similar story when Donald Trump becomes the official nominee on Thursday night?
Well, I think it's certainly a lot of excitement. I know looking at the screen and seeing everybody on the floor, I'm sure the Ohio delegation's very excited. But look, I think it's a good pick for President Trump. I mean, Senator Vance brings an element of youth to this race that we haven't seen, that's for sure. The guy's a United States Senator, obviously qualified to serve. Great messenger, which is, I think, very important when you think about what's going to be going on the next 4 or 5 months in this campaign.
Well, as we consider this selection, though, knowing that you represent one of the key swing states we are watching in this cycle, knowing Georgia is not bright red or bright blue, what does JD Vance bring to undecided voters in Georgia? How is he likely to influence that opinion when he, as we've talked about, may just be seen as a younger version of Donald Trump himself?
Well, I think it's not just what JD Vance brings to the race, but also what President Trump and other Republicans can do between now and November to make sure that you're getting those persuadable voters. For me, and what I'm hearing every day is that, Americans and Georgians can't afford another 4 years of Joe Biden. I think that is a message that J.D. Vance can deliver. It's certainly a message that President Trump and a lot of other Republicans, whether it be, people that we're trying to help win at the state House and state Senate level to hold our majorities in the General Assembly in Georgia, are going to be talking about people. I mean, obviously, he's been very outspoken as well on the disaster at the southern border under this administration's policy. So I think there's a number of issues that will resonate with swing state voters.
He referred to Donald Trump back in 2016 after the book came out as noxious. He said leading the white working class into a very dark place. Was there some truth to that when you look back?
Well, I haven't read the book. But, a lot of people write a lot of different things in the book.
Well, he did a lot of interviews in that time as well.
Yeah, no, well, I get that. I was busy doing my job and wasn't too worried about his book. But listen, I think this is all about the future. There's been a lot of tough politics, a lot of rhetoric. I mean, I've been involved in some of that as well with the former president. A lot of other people have too. A lot of other people he was considered to be vice president said, other things that may not have been that flattering.
It's all water under the bridge.
Yeah, but that happens in politics. You can look on the flip side of that. Kamala Harris said a lot of bad things about Joe Biden and ended up being his vice presidential pick. So, I think it's going to be incumbent on people to stay focused on the future.
Okay, so if we stay focused on the future and think about the kind of policy that these two as a joint ticket are likely to push for, we know that they lean toward populism, protectionism. Even Senator J.D. Vance, being from Ohio, has been very outspoken, for example, when it comes to the steel industry and that it should stay in American hands, looking at that U.S. Steel Nippon takeover, something we followed very carefully at Bloomberg. But these ideas of, say, higher tariffs, as you sit here and tell us that what Georgians really care about is the money in their pocket, is raising the cost of goods for Americans by putting a blanket tariff on everything, perhaps 60% plus on goods coming out of China, a way that you can improve that feeling for people?
Well, I would let them speak to their policy positions. But if you look at what Joe Biden's been doing, he's been picking winners and losers. So to me, I think what former President Trump and what people like J.D. Vance, look, I don't agree with everything that J.D. Vance has been talking about. I have different views myself. A lot of people are going to disagree on issues on the economy and on jobs and, other things that are going on. But, the thing is to try, in my opinion, is to let the market work and don't pick winners and losers. And that's what Joe Biden has been doing. I think the populist in Donald Trump and people like J.D. Vance is really trying to fight for the American worker and the little guy out there that's, they're not getting their, education, tuition paid for. Their kids may not even have the opportunity to go for college, and just trying to really fight for that everyday American that's out there. I think is really what they're focused on. And look, there's a lot of other policymakers in Washington, D.C. that may not go along with that either. So, you have to keep all these things relative. But it's like, who do you think is best going to fight for you in the White House? And to me, it's the Republican ticket, the Republican policymakers that have been pushing back and didn't create this 40-year high inflation where people's mortgage rates have gone up, their rent's gone up, their insurance gone up. They're complaining when they go to the gas station. They're complaining when they go to the grocery store, and they've seen a disaster at the southern border and a weakening in our status around the world.
Well, to pick up on Kailey's point, there's a big debate going on right now about making permanent the Trump tax cuts from 2017. On the surface, this sounds like something that might bring relief to consumers, but we have economists telling us every day that that will stoke inflation even further. Would you tell Donald Trump to tap the brakes on that idea?
Well, I would not try to be advising them on what they're going to do on federal tax policy, but I can tell you from the state perspective, we have to balance our budget in the state of Georgia, and we've been lowering.
You don't know what that means in Washington.
Yeah, I know you don't, but and you spend too much money too. So I mean, there's ways that you can offset tax cuts to not have an inflationary environment, and that's certainly what we tried to work on in Georgia by lowering the rate, not only on the personal income tax, but also on the corporate side of things, so we have a good business environment where people can get a good paying job that can outpace inflation, have good government benefits, and that's really what Republicans are fighting for. What Joe Biden and his people have been fighting for is picking winners and losers, back in the union-based automakers versus people like we have in Georgia that are non-union. And to me, it's just, if the policy's so good, make it the same for everybody. And if it isn't, then don't have the policy. But look, I agree. We've got to look at government spending, especially in Washington, D.C. It's a reason our debts and deficits are up. It's driving, part of the interest rate equation. And I think as the Fed continues to look at where the unemployment numbers are and the slowing of the economy, and how they deal with that, it's going to be incumbent for policymakers in D.C. to make good decisions, too.
Governor, of course, we thought all of our conversations this week, for the most part, would be dominated by policy. But in some ways, the tone has very much changed, given the events of this weekend and the attempted assassination on Donald Trump. Considering what we did see in your state in 2020, threats against poll workers, for example, political violence, obviously, on January 6th, as the election was attempted to be certified in Washington in early 2021, how concerned are you about political violence in your state as we get closer to November?
Well, look, we're going to keep people safe in Georgia. I'm not too awful concerned about that, but my job is to make sure that we're, concerned about that. So, I don't want to give the appearance that I'm worried about something like that's going to happen, but I also want people to know that we're going to be prepared for that. I will just tell you that, my thoughts and prayers go out to the, just heartbreaking loss of a true American hero that died in that crowd protecting his family, the others that are injured, and, thank God President Trump is with us today here in Milwaukee. I cannot imagine what this country would be like right now if that bullet had moved an inch or two the wrong way. But I think it is an opportunity for all of us really to just think about the words that we're saying and to make sure that, we're having our battles in a respectful way at the ballot box, not with fighting amongst one another or weapons of choice, or as what was reported, bomb making supplies in this kid's car. We need to really think through what we're saying to people. I was telling Marty and my team earlier, I go to church with a lot of people that I know don't vote for me, but they don't yell at me at church. We're just praying together. And I think that's really what the country needs to think about as we move to November. Fight hard for your position, but let's have civil discourse and settle this at the ballot box.
Well, a lot of people remember the language on the perfect phone call. And a lot of people know who Brian Kemp is because of that call, along with your Secretary of State, Raffensperger. You fast forward to this political convention now, and I wonder what your thoughts are about Donald Trump. If you trust him to be the steward here going forward, if he does win re-election, and would you endeavor to have a relationship with him?
Well, man, we're going to work with any administration that's in Washington, D.C. And I'll tell you, we had a great working relationship with the Trump administration when they were in office. I had a great relationship with the vice president, got to know really well a lot of the cabinet secretaries.
You can recreate that?
Work very closely. And, I've been asked the question,
Sure.
Do you, how do you feel about democracy and it surviving this election? And I actually feel, very optimistic about that. I think the institutions of government are very strong. There's a lot of good people. When they put their hand on that Bible and take that oath, they mean it. Mm-hmm. And I think they'll do their job and follow the law and the Constitution, the rest of this year and through this election. And, I think I really feel optimistic about that.
Well, so if Georgia's result comes down to a few thousand votes, as it did last time, 12,000, whatever, and the result is the same where it is not a victory for Donald Trump, do you trust him to react differently this time?
Well, I would just tell you, I can't speak for how other people are going to react and other candidates, because I couldn't do that with Stacey Abrams when she never conceded to me in 2018.
But Stacey Abrams wasn't convicted on racketeering charges, or indicted, rather.
Well, Stacey Abrams has got a lot of legal problems right now that most people don't report on, and her groups do. Maybe not her personally, but her groups certainly do. But I will tell you that I think the institutions of government, at least in the state of Georgia, will hold in the 2020 election. I'm very confident on that, and I'm very confident that we're going to have a secure, accessible, fair election in our state.
Should Georgia drop the case against Donald Trump?
Well, I don't know that Georgia has a case against Donald Trump.
Because of what the Supreme Court said?
Well, I mean, you'd have to ask Fonnie Willis that question. I mean, that is the, local district attorney that has brought that case, not the state of Georgia.